Hello and welcome to our Insights podcast, again sponsored by Value Edge Group. I am Leon Herzon, your host, and I have the pleasure to have with me Dr. Elissa Farrow, an expert in future thinking and a lot of other stuff. So thank you and welcome again, Elissa.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here with you, Leon, on different sides of the planet, no doubt.
Exactly. And for our viewers and listeners, Elissa is based in Australia, in Brisbane, right? So you can talk a little bit about yourself if you want, but our viewers would like to understand a little bit more about future thinking. What is the difference between traditional forecasting and trend analysis, which is what we do on a day by day when we manage companies and etc. We look for trends, we do forecasts. What is future thinking?
Thanks, Leon. For me, futures thinking is not about predictions. It's often, for some people, they think, oh, what is this futures thinking approach? And for me, it's a really important mindset that you go into a deep futures thinking process. So for futurists such as myself, who believe in highly participatory processes, I believe that the future is not predetermined, that we always have alternatives. I believe also that the future is not predictable. So we've got choices and we can influence. And futurists use data, but they also use other approaches, including horizon scanning and scenario analysis and other layered styles of investigation to unpack what the possibilities of the future could be, even if they seem a little bit absurd at the time. But that information still is a possibility of something that could happen in the future. And then it's about making definitive actions to try and shape the futures that we're looking for. So, yeah, it's a fascinating field. It's been around for over 50 years in terms of formal professional futurist associations, such as the World Futures Studies Federation, the Association of Professional Futurists. So all of us believe that, that there are many futures that we can explore.
So if I understand correctly, and I don't have that very well defined it on the books that I read, but I need your help here. So what you're saying is that through the data and the forecasting, the trend analysis, is not that they are going to point to a future and that's it. What you're saying is that, okay, you have several possibilities, and based on our decisions, that's where the future happens. So we have an active participation on defining what this future is. And I would assume that a futurist is the one that shows, okay, those are the scenarios and those are the possible decisions that we can make to make this future happen. Is that accurate?
Yes. So it's an extension on traditional forms of strategy work. Like, as Leon, you and I have been around many different strategic leadership teams where they look to the future. They might do a corporate planning or strategic planning exercise annually, or they might have strategies that are like 3 to 5 years typically. So futurists extend the reach. So a lot of the work that I do in my futurist world is blending disciplines. So, for example, an organisation recently asked me to run some strategy sessions, but rather than just saying, oh, let's not look at the next 3 years, I said, well, why don't we beam it out and look at what the industry is like in 20 years' time?
Oh wow,
And
yeah,
for some people, it's a bit of a whoa, like makes them feel a little bit sort of uncomfortable, and they, oh, it's not possible. But it is possible if you open your mind, if you have a skilled facilitator, and if you actually realize that it's often our biases, our cultural norms, or even past experiences that sort of sometimes blinker or block us from seeing possibilities or imaginations. Surely over time, people would have been seen to be crazy, with the idea of artificial intelligence, for example. But now here we are in 2025. AI is starting to be everywhere, and people are now starting to go, "Wow!" But not everyone was thinking that it would be here so rapidly.
yeah.
But futurists had that thought, as well as scientists, of course, and engineers.
So when you're facilitating, by the way, to our viewers again and listeners, uh, um, we know how successful you are in facilitating those sessions. What is, you think, the main challenge people have when they attend those type of sessions?
Hmm.
Because most executives or leaders, they are used to the traditional forecast. Let's see what's happened in the past so we can imagine what's going to happen in the future, look for some signs. What is the main challenge that you think those participants on your sessions face?
Yeah. Well, Leon, I honestly think that it is. Oh, how do I put this? It's the mindsets that executives hold at times. It's the systems that have reinforced certain performance criteria of the past. That often, for me, is the first thing that in any workshop I facilitate we need to unpack. So sometimes senior people are open to possible futures. Sometimes people just believe that their industry will remain roughly the same. It might get a
Don't
bit
change,
more,
eh?
yeah, technologically enhanced. But the most important part of any futures process at the very beginning is to go through a process that is about unlearning, and unlearning, which means set the current reality aside, even for those couple of hours that you might be together, and invite them to free themselves of assumptions, biases, or ways of thinking. And what I like to do, and many other futurists who do this deep participatory work, is to identify what would be considered a used future. It's a funny sort of term. A used future is essentially the things that we are still pushing towards or believing, even when they don't take us closer to our ideal future. So they're like the things that we hold on to, say, like in the old days, Leon, some of our early collaborations, we people would say, oh no, the classroom is the place for learning only, as opposed to which we now have hybrid ways of learning, and we have virtual ways of learning, and we have total alternatives where I could be in the future a digital twin of Dr. Elissa Farrow having this interview with you. I am human. This is Elissa with you now.
It's not an avatar, everybody.
Not an avatar, but theoretically, you could see a used future at some point in the future would be that the educator is not human. We're seeing that now in some disciplines, some entrepreneurial learning developers who have just got an avatar who's providing the content, no human at all, but the human recipient is getting the
Yeah.
full value of that. So if we're not able in an executive leadership retreat or opportunity to be able to unshackle what could be that will never happen, yeah, we've really got to focus on unlearning first.
Well, I like very much when you said unlearn and imagination. So two to things. And sometimes it's very hard to unlearn because we have our set ways, right? So it's not an easy thing. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. Wow, this is great, Elise. And by the way, that reminds me about a conversation I had. You just mentioned about the other Dr. Farrow being an avatar. I was talking with Dr. Barkawi about corporate education or corporate training, right? And he said that maybe in the future, what we can have is somebody who selects what type of training they want, and then it's going to be delivered by an avatar in the language the person wants, right? So I
Mm.
think that's very close to happen, right?
Yeah, yeah, I think it definitely is, and I believe, just the rapid changes that have happened with AI, generative AI, including ChatGPT, where originally it was only in English, and now pretty much many languages to be able to converse, upload, get results back. And there's a famous futurist, Leon. His name's called Professor Jim Dator, and he suggested, which I love this quote, that for any idea about the future to be useful, it must at first appear to be ridiculous. and
That's
and that's that. Yeah, what we were talking about earlier about executives coming into these workshops with myself, where we are eventually going to come up with a strategy, of course, that needs to be actioned today. But things only appear ridiculous to us because they haven't yet found a place in our current understanding of reality. And that's that whole notion of being able to um, you can see the possibilities if you are able to um, free yourself from some of those more structured forms of thinking that limit your imagination.
So I think you already covered why future thinking is important in the world that we live right now. It's an ever-changing world, and it's even more now with AI, as you just mentioned, right? Who you think benefits the most of practicing future thinking? Because I assume it's not only experts in future thinking who can do this type of exercise, right? We
Yeah,
can do
yeah,
that,
yeah.
ideally with some facilitation, but who you think can benefit the most for practicing future thinking?
Well, I think that futures thinking is something that can be applied personally. It can also be applied, to teams or industries or whole systems as well. So anyone could get benefit from thinking in a more of an anticipatory, longer term perspective. And I think that it's a practice that I practice as a form of almost like reflective practice for myself. I've seen and applied futures tools or layered forms of analysis in coaching sessions with senior people, with juniors, with young people as part of some of the youth programs that I'm part of, and futures processes have got a strong tie to the United Nations as well, who get people from any country, any age or demographic or community to involve themselves in thinking what could be the future of our community, what could be the future of myself, and then apply some of the tools accordingly. So futures literacy, I think, should be taught and encouraged as soon as possible, even in young children who could even draw an image of the future that they would like to see, and use that to sort of help inspire change.
Well, that's very interesting. I'm connecting now to when I talked to Diane Hamilton. She wrote a book about curiosity, and she mentioned that younger children, they have a lot of curiosity, and
Mm,
once they get some when they start growing up and see some constraints that people put on that, they reduce that level of creativity, right? So you're saying to instigate and to promote this imagination, this creativity in younger generation, it's a great approach, right?
Mm, mm. And in particular, using tools as simple as scenarios. The scenarios that there's another famous futurist called Professor Joseph Voros, and he came up with a scenario approach called the futures cone, and it has five different forms of scenario to help explore. And those five areas are in the area of what is our, preferable future, what is a preposterous future, so those real outliers or wild cards. What's a plausible future? What's a possible future? And at the end of the day, coming up with what would be our our projected process. So that is a really simple way of unpacking the futures, because it also gives you to simplify it, like lenses to look through, and gives you permission to think about the crazy ideas that you could only dream about in science fiction novels that probably many years ago was seen to be those crazy, that person's a bit crazy, but actually they ended up becoming true things, or things that inspired the science to come together, like drones, for example, or like Uber vehicles, or like robotic delivery processes, all science fiction written, but now a reality. Now we've got the energy, we've got the smarts, we've got people who want to back and create the idea, and then the curiosity of people to interact with those and then demand those as a form of service. It's
Well,
long term thinking shaping the world. We need it more than ever now.
yeah, I agree, and that reminds me of Star Trek in the early
Mm,
'60s, right? They had the flip phone, and it
yep.
was completely, as you said, it's ridiculous to imagine that's even possible. And today, that's commonplace. And that was,
Yes.
I don't know, 70, 80 years ago, 70 years ago, before the cell phone came out. But
Yes.
many of those stuff that were completely impossible, doors opening by themselves, and cell phones and things, universal translator, right now it's possible. You can I can be talking here in English and be immediately translated to somebody in
Mm.
Chinese, in Arabic, in Portuguese, and
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is. So those things are very interesting. And I also started to think here about how can, imagine on the early 1900s, people trying to imagine the future. They will never imagine what we got today, right?
Mm.
It's going to be almost impossible for them to. But that exercise is the entire point. And I
Yeah.
love when you said the ridiculous thing. We have no idea how close this thing can be from reality, right?
Yeah, well, I think, there's a lot of people in different parts of the world who remember that Simpsons, the cartoon The Simpsons episode that had Lisa Simpson as the president, and also had the current president of the United States as predicted. And they often, that people joke about, what the Simpsons actually predicted to be true.
Predicted the future.
Even if at the time we thought it to be ridiculous, there's been many over the last even the last 5 years that people never expected. The pandemic is one of those
Yeah.
those things that many of us probably didn't expect would happen, and then it showed the sort of vulnerability of the planet, the people, and the resilience as well. So surely someone somewhere would have been going, "Oh, this could happen," at some point, but it was probably never part of a business continuity plan in many of the clients and you and I would have worked with over time,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
certainly is now. And working from home, that was something that people would have gone, this can't happen. They've got to be in the office. They're more productive. But then suddenly, due to greater pressures, the work from home option is more prevalent. Yeah. And corporations are
Exactly.
taking
Yeah.
the advantage of that, as are employees who now can use that as a employee value proposition. Hmm.
In how the
Fascinating
pandemic
stuff.
actually accelerated the technology, right? Because due
Mm,
to the pandemic, now we have the technology that allows us to do what we are doing today and have all those virtual meetings and even virtual training and things that were people working remotely, as you just mentioned. So
mm,
let me go now to, if our viewers here and listeners would like to know some of the practical tools and methods that they can use for future thinking, what would that be? And beyond that, organizations. How organization will build such practice?
mm. Yeah. I think the first the first thing to say is that there are a lot of futures tools out there, and there's some schools like universities, but there's also some private institutes that teach people um, typical futures tools. But one of the places that I like to go to read up on what people have been utilizing is the Journal of Future Studies. It's connected to a university in Taiwan called Tamkan University, but it's a open source journal. The other place that I would go to find great examples of practical application of futures tools is a magazine connected to the World Futures Studies Federation called Human Futures Magazine. And I'm one of the editors of that magazine. But we get a lot of people writing in from across the world with showcases of how they've used futures tools and approaches to unpack and unpick certain problems as well. So there are a couple of really rich sources of information. The other one that I used strongly in my doctoral research was from one of my former supervisors, Professor Sahel Ainatullah, and his wife, Professor Ivana Milosevic, and they created what's called the Six Pillars approach. And it takes a number of different futures tools and then puts it in a really tidy sort of toolkit that you can apply as well. So I strongly encourage people to check out those three sources: Journal of Future Studies, Human Futures magazine, and Ainatollah and Milosevic's Six Pillars. And it's all publicly available. And then it's about designing an approach that would work best. The practice concept, that second part of your question, I help organisations create futures practices. So you and I, Leon, have been around portfolio and project management offices for years and years and years. So I take practice development in a similar way to how I apply a centre of excellence in terms of those other disciplines.
Yep.
So futurists at least one, or access to a panel of different trusted, um, uh, ideally academically trained or at least practiced futures thinkers, selection of different tools and approaches, and then that strong maturity development around futures thinking. So being able to be open, being able to be mindful of our biases, to be creative, to maybe even use games and other forms of interaction to unlock things that seem to be just in one channel. But futures
Mhm.
practices are, I think, a competitive advantage for organisations. And I'm doing a talk soon for a group of intelligence professionals, and our Australian uh, service of intelligence, ASIO, they have a futures hub as part of their organisation, and it's critical to any organisation, but particularly relevant for those in intelligence circles.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, for our viewers here, if you want to know more, you can always connect with Dr. Farrow through LinkedIn. Make sure that you ask your questions. If you didn't get the references here, you can also connect with us. So now I have a tricky question for you. I'm thinking here. I ask you the main challenges for people to be involved on this exercise. Do you think that our values, cultural background, assumptions shape kind of the view that we have for the future? And how can we deal with that type of bias? Because I assume that's true, based on your background, based on your cultural preconceptions, and etc. You might see a different future than somebody else, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do we deal with that?
Well, the biggest way, or the most effective way, that I have found to overcome those processes is firstly, of course, your own awareness. So, we think about emotional intelligence, being multi layered. We think about our own past experiences potentially affecting our view of today's events due to past trauma, or just even the way that our cultural
The
upbringing might have been
upbringing,
like.
yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So it's important, I think, to not say that we can magically just remove all of that, but to certainly put the provocation out to say, for us to see a future, we need to make sure that we're doing it in a collaborative, connected way that does embrace a full definition of diversity, which means that I show up, you show up, they show up, and we, because of the fact that we've all had these different experiences, when we combine that together, if we're all willing to go there, we can actually combine and expand further. So I think a participatory process, acknowledging diversity, acknowledging the history that we all have, but providing the opportunity for people to play with the future in a safe context and a creative context, is what I've found will get people to sort of maybe even listen to an alternate perspective, and then shape a future that is more of a collective, plausible future or positive future, just because we've come together. But it's got to be, um, individuals have to be willing to do that. And if people aren't
To be
willing
open
to
and
do that,
to, yeah. Hmm.
yeah, their willingness is key. So people coming into these approaches, if they're just saying my way or the highway, or I'm the leader and I'm not going, I know what I want to do, and no one's going to
That
change my
was
mind.
exactly my
That's a
next question.
problem.
I was thinking, you have a session, then you have a top executive that says that's how I envision the future, and then everybody else retracts,
Yes,
right?
and that's the risk
So
of the
usually,
process.
would you suggest that when you have meetings when a top executive is present, that person talks less
I would
to avoid this?
Yeah, I would double check the culture of the organization, and if and that's part of the preparation. You don't just have a futures workshop, immediately. There's preparation, of course, like any good workshop. What's the culture? What are the current systemic problems? What if they did a recent employee engagement survey, for example? What were the results? What is the CEO like? Are they open-minded? Are they well loved by their staff,
Hmm.
or are they a bit sort of feared? And based on that analysis, and then based on
Then, yeah.
yeah, the conversation, like coaching conversations almost with those senior people to say, will you be able to put 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 things down and allow the group to manifest? But I believe very much in the power of individual agency and the power of the pen in these workshop forums, where anyone, regardless of level, has the ability to input into the process. And then mixed groups, if we're doing more of an in-person workshop, mix up the dynamics, or in some circumstances, corral the dynamics, so that the senior leaders can work together, and then the juniors can sort of work separately. But then we have a convergent point in the workshop where we
Yes.
come together. But it's the reinforcement of the ground rules of, futures thinking processes only work really effectively if we are able to have that open mind, and if we're blocking potential futures from even just being spoken about, well, what's underneath that? So it's an opportunity to get reflective, or it's an opportunity to say, well, this organization's not ready for this sort of thinking, and to just stick with the same process of, you know, a strategy for 3 years, as opposed to looking what could be the 20-year, 50-year future of this particular industry or organization.
How often you find situations where you actually recommend? I think we shouldn't. You should continue on that route. I don't think you guys are ready for this type of future thinking.
I would say that it does happen, unfortunately, more often than what I would love. And
Hmm.
partly it's because of the fact that organisations are used to, in some circumstances, even being regulated to only see shorter term futures. But those organisations that want to look beyond that, and in some industries, such as in water utilities that I've worked with, or
Hmm.
energy companies that I've worked with, their infrastructure development plans go 20, 30, 40, 50 years, because it takes a long time
Oh
to,
wow,
to deal with some of these mega and complex initiatives. So they're already sort of thinking further ahead, in
far
some
out. Yeah.
circumstances, than some of the other organisations in more volatile areas, where they feel that they can't even put a peg in the ground in the future just because of the complexity. Yeah, it's
Very
quite
nice.
quite interesting. But even a small part of every workshop I do, I try to encourage at least a 10 to 20 year horizon as a conversation,
Good.
because it
So
is a
you
good
talk.
process.
Yeah. So you talk about some techniques and how much storytelling play in future thinking. Is this something that is useful? Because we love stories. Everybody loves
Mm.
stories. So I was thinking that there might be a good way that we can use storytelling for future thinking and inspire the real world action, right?
Yeah, yeah. Storytelling is a big part of the futures process, and it's also honoring the voices of the past. So futures thinking isn't always about just saying, "Oh, forget what's happened." It's thinking, well, what's the past shared history? What's been the landscape that has brought us here to today, so that then we can think, well, what is the way that the landscape will move over time. So storytelling is a major part of the process, including what I've recently been doing some work exploring the future of change management for the Change Management Institute. And can't say too much right now because they're going to be doing a big release of that process. But a big part of that research process that I facilitated was getting people to share stories of what the future could be in different scenarios. So what could be the future of doing change management in a highly sort of tech-driven context versus one where maybe like what we had recently in Queensland, a cyclone where we lost power and we lost even data. Our phones weren't working anymore. So what would doing change be like if we had none of those tools in place? And it's interesting when people start thinking about the stories. The power also comes when you put yourself in the picture. So for me
Uh-huh.
and you, Leon, if we were to take ourselves in a time machine 20 years into the future and we looked around, what would it be like, in our cities or in our towns? But then if we just said in 20 years time and you add 20 onto my age and 20 onto your age, we'll still be doing these conversations then, but we think, oh, but that limits my view because I'll be really old. But then my niece or will be 20 years older. She'll be an adult as opposed to a small child. And so what's the future I want for the next generation? And when you personalize it, it unlocks different parts of people's thinking as opposed to, what's the water utility of the future like, or what's the intelligence professional of the future like? Well, what do you want the future to be like for your kids? Or even your unborn grandchildren, like what
Yeah.
do you want the future to be like? And it seems to touch that uniquely human part of ourselves, which makes people think, well, gosh, I want a future to be just as good as today, or I want it to be better, or I want it to be cleaner
Yeah.
environmentally. I want us to still be here. I don't want us to, be in such hardship. So, yeah, those abilities to beam out and then beam into the deeply personal, I find, unlocks people's thinking and makes them sit up and be a bit more serious about thinking. Well, man, I don't want my little niece to sort of have that situation. I want her to be thriving and happy and healthy and well in a future and working in the way that she wants to. And so how can I do things today to make that a reality?
Yeah, I think we all want our next generation to be better than we are right now. I would like to ask you not if what you think about the future of AI. I think that's a very hard question to answer. But are you on the side of the optimists on the future related to AI or the pessimists? Because when you read a lot of books out there and articles, you have all kind of positions, right? From the very pessimistic to the very optimistic. Where do you position, Elissa, yourself when you look to AI?
Hmm. Well, I'm originally a social scientist, Leon, and still am. So very strongly a believer in social justice and in peace and in ending violence. And so I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist in my doctoral research where I did look at organizations of the future. So in 2040, I was exploring at the time. I believe that there are scenarios that can be utopian or dystopian, and I'm going to back more of an optimistic perspective, but we have to still be careful, and we have to still uh, curate and create that context. But the reality, I think, is that there's always someone somewhere who will want to use AI for evil. And unfortunately, it's those stories that get more press than the amazing stuff that's
Yes.
happening now in health, in environment, in connection, that AI is doing for us now. Those stories need to be amplified more, to me, to shift people's thinking about, flipping to the dystopian, the robot ruling the world scenario, which is a scenario, but it doesn't have to be true.
and,
what
and
it,
and
what
on the same I'm on the same group as you are. I'm more optimistic. I also think we have to take our precautions. As you mentioned at the beginning, we can build our future, but we need to know what we have to do, right? Let me
yeah.
ask you before I let you go, one or two books that were instrumental for you that you would like to recommend to our viewers and listeners here.
Yes, good question. One of the books that I really enjoy reading from time to time is a sort of bit of an interesting book. I quite like reading the Little Prince as a book. I just can't exactly remember who wrote it right now.
Saint-Exupéry.
Yes. See, that's we need each other, don't we, in these processes? But I love that book
Yes.
because it's sort of teaches, I guess, the responsibility of relationships to others, and trying to consider people's appreciation of our responsibility in the world generally. And the other book that I've been really enjoying recently is called Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Kimmerer. And Braiding Sweetgrass is a beautiful story about uh, her connection uh, her connection back into her heritage, and also the importance of sustainability as well. But the way that it's written, I've got her audio book as well, and she is actually reading it. Is just like, oh, just like honey. It's beautiful. So yeah, they're two. So if I was, yeah, braiding sweetgrass and the Little Prince, because they're creative, but they're also deeply layered and a bit fun as well.
Yes.
Of course, we need that. We need a bit of fun.
Thank you. Okay. I know I would like to stay here and talk to you for a long time, but I think we have to wrap up. And I would like to ask you for final thoughts to our viewers, listeners here. What would you like to say?
I would just like to say, in our current context globally, uh, it's very, very important that we all keep our ability to trust our intuition, and to keep our senses strong, which means that it don't necessarily just take everything as truth. To look behind some of the messaging that you may receive, and to trust yourself. And for me, I love doing sense making and reflective practices with people, and strongly encourage you to do that, and know that you're not alone in feeling all sorts of different feelings at the moment, based on what's happening in our global, or even local context. So yeah, that's all I'd like to say, I think, with love.
All right. So thank you again. It's always a pleasure. And by the way, Dr. Farrow and I, we wrote the articles last year, right, about the
Mm.
impact of project AI in project management. You guys
Mm-hmm.
can Google it. You feel free to check it out. So thank you
Mm.
again. Really appreciate. It's always a pleasure. Always learning
Yeah,
something new
thank
with
you.
you, Elissa. So thank you.
Thank you.